Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Yeah, it's been a long time. Like, I think I have went past my posting time because, you know, because I kind of was struggling with what video I should like make the next one, and like there are major things happening in YouTube right now, and I kind of felt like maybe I should put my opinions on those, but I just like didn't feel like it. Anyways, so today we're going to talk about hookup culture today. And I'm kind of scared about this video because I feel like people might not be able to understand, especially my audience might not be able to understand most of the things that I will be talking about in this video. So I will try to make the explanations as simplified as possible. I really wanted to talk about hookup culture because I think it's a very interesting thing to talk about because it has been growing in the past couple of years. And I really thought that analyzing hookup culture would be very, very interesting. So first of all, we have to talk about the introduction of hookup. What is hookup? So, well, hookup is having a sexual encounter with someone that is not your spouse. And this has been on the rise in the Western world, US, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and Europe, obviously. But in the Eastern world, like my part of the world, I think it has been on the rise, but people just don't really share that they hooked up with someone because it's very taboo around here, having sex outside of marriage. And yeah, that's all. So this is the brief introduction of hookup culture. So I think now we have to talk about the history of hookup culture. Well, what happened was in the 1920s, slowly like parents, they stopped accompanying their children while they were, dating with other men to find out if they're compatible or not, to, seek a marriage. It started really gaining huge momentum after the 1960s. So 1960s was when the feminist movement started, and there was this widespread availability of birth contraceptives. And yeah, this is why like people started hooking up left and right. And I think, if I'm not wrong, and like the sexual revolution also started in the 1960s, right? And because of this, people started hooking up left and right. I will not be saying if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I will be talking about what kind of advantages hookup culture has, what kind of disadvantages hookup culture has. Okay, so I think I also have to mention that in the 1960s, obviously, like birth contraceptives were widely available to men and women. However, they were not available to single women. They were handed out to, married women, because even at that time, like having sex outside of marriage was considered a taboo. Okay, so now we have to talk about the media's role in hookup culture. And I personally think, and I will be giving you data here, I really think that hookup culture is kind of encouraged by media. It is perpetuated in the media. So I'll be reading something out, and here it says that in a 2005 Kaiser Family Foundation report about sex on television, media was highlighted as a primary basis for emerging adults' opinions about sex, right? So what this says is like media was the prime contributor to people's like how people understood sex. And consistent with their result of 77% of primetime television programs containing some sexual content. So at that time, 77% of television programs had some sexual content. And also, according to the American Psychological Association, media suggests that uncommitted sex or hookups can be both physically and emotionally enjoyable and occur without strings. So there are many movies. I have not watched any of these movies, but this is what the these are the movies that the American Psychological Association talks about. Hooking Up, No Strings Attached, Queer as Folk, and The L Word. Now here we have to talk about why people hook up. There are various reasons why people hook up. I will be listing them one by one. But first we have to talk about the sexual cost of men and women having sex. So for men, there is no sexual cost behind having sex. So men can just have sex and can go on their own way. However, when it comes to women, women have to bear the heaviest burden when it comes to sex, because they are the ones who get pregnant. So this is why men and women differ when it comes to hooking up, right? So if you say why men hook up, men hook up because it kind of like strengthens their chances of having children in the future, right? Because if a man has sex with one woman, yeah, she might be pregnant, she might not be, but if he has sex with 100 women, so his chances of his genes being continued will be higher. And it will be even higher if he has sex with 1,000 women. I am definitely not condoning men or women to have sex with a lot of people. It's your choice. I'm not saying anything like that. Please don't at me, okay? But when it comes to women, like I said, women have to bear the burden of having sex. This is why women are picky when it comes to their partners, because they have to know that their partners are financially stable, like they have enough resources so that their spouse, like in a heterosexual couple, their husband or their boyfriend or whatever you call them, like they will be able to provide for their children. This is why women are very picky about having sex with men. To put it simply, men hook up a lot because they can secure their chances of continuing their genes. Women, on the other hand, they are a little bit reserved. I'm not saying all of them, obviously not, but women tend to be reserved because there is a higher cost of having sex. I'm not talking about socially or culturally, I'm talking about biologically, because they have to bear children, and if they are not with a better mate, then that mate will not be able to provide them with the resources for the children to grow up. That's all. After talking about why men and women tend to hook up, I think we also have to discuss about, do men hook up more than women? Now, this has been debated, and this still can't be concluded that men hook up more or women hook up more. Why? Because one paper specifically stated that men tend to increase the number of hookups that they have had, and women usually tend to downplay the number of hookups they have had. So they're not completely honest, right? So if men tend to increase, then obviously it will show that men tend to hook up more than women, which can't be really true. So there is one study, so this is the paper. According to the paper, Hooking Up, Gender Differences, Evolution and Pluralistic Ignorance, which had 507 undergraduate students as the participants, men were more comfortable with certain sexual behaviors than women. Okay, just because men were more comfortable with, carrying out certain sexual acts does not mean yet that men hook up more than women. Like I said, men tend to increase the number of hookups they have had, and women tend to downplay the number of hookups they have had. And also, what I think, I could be wrong on this because I'm not this research master, but I think having a very tiny sample size of just 507 undergraduate students is not going to specifically conclude if men hook up more than women or not. But it did say that men tend to be more comfortable with certain sexual behaviors than women. So the other reason why people hook up, like men and women both, is because of this concept called pluralistic ignorance. Now, this sounds like a mouthful, but it's not that difficult to understand. So what pluralistic ignorance is, that, let's say, for example, I am a person who believes that hooking up is not good. However, I am around people, like let's say there are 10 people in my group and I'm the only one who thinks that hooking up is not good. So majority of the remaining 9 people will obviously think that hooking up is really, really good, right? So what I will do is I will say, yeah, hooking up is really, really good, because I think that since my friend group thinks that hooking up is good, I will assume that the entire society thinks like this. So this is why I go along with it, right? So this can explain why people hook up in the Western world, right? Because in Western world, hooking up is considered fine. In fact, sometimes I felt like I've seen the word virgin is used as a very derogatory term, and this is why in the Western world, there are very minimum amount of people who have sex, who don't have sex before marriage and are virgin when they're married. They actually assume that majority of people think it's fine to have sex before marriage or hooking up, so this leads to people hooking up even more. But when it comes to society like mine and a lot of other societies in the rest of the world, having sex before marriage is considered taboo. So pluralistic ignorance here is going to be completely opposite, right? So most of the society is going to think that hooking up is terrible, but if I think hooking up is good, I will have to go along with my friends thinking that hooking up is bad, because I will assume that the society thinks hooking up is bad. So I hope you understood everything that I talked about regarding pluralistic ignorance. The other reason why people tend to hook up, so according to American Psychological Association, people are hooking up because their puberty is starting earlier, and marriage age is getting later and later. It's getting very older and older. That's what I mean to say. So obviously, if people start puberty early, then they will have sexual desires, and if they're getting married really late, then they still have to fulfill their sexual desires, right? So obviously people are going to hook up. However, I really think that why people hook up is because of the fact that people usually mistake pleasure with happiness. So when you hook up, when you have sex, there is a hormone named dopamine that's released in your brain. You feel good, right? And dopamine is also like a addiction hormone. So a person with a lot of addiction problems has less dopamine receptors. So that person will need a lot of drugs to create that same high, right? So if you hook up a lot, then obviously your brain will get adapted to dopamine, and it will have less and less dopamine, and you have to hook up more to get that original high. And people mistake this high that you get from addiction or whatever, people mistake that with happiness, which is a wrong thing. And I think this is why people tend to hook up as well. This is just purely my opinion. Now we have to talk about the positive things of hookup. Obviously, everything has positive and negative aspects, and I really think that there are positive aspects of hooking up. I think one of the most positive things about hooking up is women's sexual pleasure is not taken as something very taboo. People really take women's sexual pleasure very, very seriously in a society where hooking up is very, very normal. The other positive thing about hooking up is sex does not become a taboo anymore. It becomes a normal thing. It's more like acknowledging that we human beings are also animals and we need sex to survive, right? And I think another positive thing is that people will actually know what kinds of things that they prefer in the bedroom if they hook up, right? And they will be aware of what they need, and they will search that kind of spouse, who are compatible sexually when they're searching for a spouse. So these are the positive things about hooking up. However, there are also negative things about hooking up, and I think one of the major negatives about hooking up is the risk of STDs. Obviously, if you use birth contraceptives like condoms, the risk will be lower, but it does not mean that the risk will be zero, especially for people who like to hook up a lot. So if you hook up with 5 people, obviously the risk is low, but if you hook up with a lot of people, then obviously the risk is going to be a lot higher. The other negative thing about hooking up is how people like to mistake pleasure with happiness. Like I said before, they want to get that pleasure they feel when they take drugs kind of pleasure, right? So this is again a wrong thing. I think people need to search for happiness to survive, not pleasure, because pleasure is going to make you miserable in the long run, but happiness is going to make you fulfilled in the long run. Now finally, I would like to talk about mental health and hookups. You can't say like people who hook up have a lot of mental problems, who don't hook up has little. You can't really say that, because there have been studies done, and like one study actually says, in a study of 394 young adults across a university semester, those with more depressive symptoms and greater feelings of loneliness who engaged in penetrative sex hookups subsequently reported a reduction in both depressive symptoms and feelings of loneliness. At the same time, participants who reported fewer depressive symptoms and fewer feelings of loneliness who engaged in penetrative sex hookups subsequently reported an increase in both depressive symptoms and feelings of loneliness. So what this means is like people who had lower instances of depressive symptoms when they engaged in penetrative sex hookups, they reported a higher chances of depression, like their depressive symptoms increasing. But people who had higher instances of depressive symptoms when they engaged in penetrative sex hookups, then they reported a lowering of their depressive symptoms. Hi, it's editing me. The other negative of hooking up like casually is the dangers that it brings. Like there might be instances of sexual assault in men and women. They might be in danger of very creepy people. And so the other one is, it talks about the self-esteem and hookups. So both men and women who had ever engaged in uncommitted sexual encounter had lower overall self-esteem scores compared with those without uncommitted sexual experiences. So what this says is people men and women who engaged in more hookups had lower self-esteem as compared to the people who did not engage in, hookups or lower instances of hookups. And it also says like hookups can result in guilt and negative feelings. Finally, it also talks about like women feeling more negative feelings than men, and obviously this can't blamed to biological reasons, right? Because our culture itself our entire culture as a whole, whether it be Western or Eastern, like we just like to demean women for hooking up a lot more, and the slut shaming and everything like that. So yes, because of that, I think women reported more feelings of guilt. That's just my opinion. Now, after talking about all of this, the final question remains, like, is it good or bad? I can't really say. It can be good for you, it can be bad for you. However, what my opinions are is like sex should be something sacred that two people in a loving relationship should share. This is just my opinion. Like, you can do whatever you want. And me just saying that sex should be a sacred thing which should be shared by two people who are in love does not mean that people who hook up regularly is a wrong thing to do. I'm not saying that, because people come from different backgrounds and people love different kinds of things. And just because I'm saying this does not mean that people who do exactly opposite to what I say are wrong. So finally, saying this much, like I said, we can't conclude if it's good or bad. It all depends on the person. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you liked it, like it, subscribe, comment, whatever you want to do. I will see you next time. My phone's storage is gone, my phone's battery is gone, my phone's everything is gone. So I'm really frustrated.